Hello, Internet. This is the Trans Trekkie. I am a Transformers fan and a Trekkie, which is what makes me the Trans Trekkie. And building off of my last video about the next logical step, um, I think this one is more about how dating is really about I think people start dating and they consider that to be the relationship rather than just the getting to know you process. Um, I personally like to get to know someone as friends before we get into a dating relationship because then at that point, the dating part essentially winds up being the romantic relationship. And realizing that not everybody does that. Sometimes, two people meet and they start a dating relationship to for the purpose of getting to know each other and know whether or not they like each other well enough to fall in love, get married, or whether this is just not going to work out and they go their separate ways or what have you. Um, and I think a lot of times people get into the dating part of it, and at that point, you feel like you're already in the relationship. And so it winds up being that thing where you wind up falling into that trap of, well, okay, we're dating. What's the next logical step? You know, get engaged, get married, what have you. When really, you're still in that space of getting to know this person. Is this really somebody that I want to spend, the rest of my life with, or do I just like this person as a friend, or am I just completely put off and don't want, you know, anything more to do with them? So, um, and again, I think, my ex wife and I certainly wound up in that scenario. We had known each other at work for probably a little over a year, and we'd been talking and we'd been getting to know each other in that setting. And then we started seeing each other outside of work, and that essentially wound up being considered the romantic relationship. And at least for her, I know for me, I was still getting to know her, and um, it was one of those things where I think I, like, again, for me, I was still, I think I'd gotten to know her well enough to know that I did want to pursue something romantic with her. So then, but on a lot of levels, we were still getting to know each other. And uh, I think really that dating part of it should have been the getting to know you phase and getting to know whether or not, this was really going to work as a relationship, or was this really going to work better as like a friendship, or should we just say coworkers, work acquaintances, or what have you. Um, and I think my main point here is that I think a lot of times people start the dating process and they think of dating as the relationship, and so it's then, like I mentioned in my last video, when you're in that relationship, you feel that pressure to, you know, do whatever you have to do to try and make it work. Whatever kind of like compromises or sacrifices that you need to make in order to make a relationship work, because relationships are work. And at the end of the day, I think that work is worth it if it's with the right person. And I think the dating process is just to know whether or not you even have feelings for a person. Um, I very much like to get to know people as friends first, because that, when you spend time with somebody as a friend, you're just getting to know them, and there you don't have that pressure of being in a relationship or dating, or any of the expectations that typically go along with those kinds of relationships. And so that plus that also gives time to, as you, at least in my experiences, I get to know somebody, that gives time for, if there is going to be any spark, it gives time for the feelings to develop. A lot of times in most of my relationships, I've gotten to know somebody, and we would wind up, romantic feelings would spring out of that friendship, and then would become the exclusive, boyfriend girlfriend relationship, or um, possibly, you know, engaged, married, what have you. Um, my The relationship with my ex-wife is really kind of the first one where we kind of got into that relationship before having the outside work, the outside of work friendship relationship. And so I think that's probably one of the reasons why, at least in that relationship, I wound up, falling into that trap of, going through the motions and, just kind of doing something because it was the next logical step or the expected thing to do. Um, but I certainly think, if you're not going to be friends first, there has to be some sort of expectation at the beginning that, hey, we're getting to know each other. This, may not necessarily, number one, it might not necessarily be exclusive. There's no expectations that this is going to be, that we're even going to develop feelings for each other, or that, this is, as such going to turn romantic, or, you know, what have you. And then, I think a lot of times that would prevent, people from falling into that trap of, just kind of going through the motions just because you're in that relationship and this is what's expected. I also think on a societal level, a lot of times when we hear, "Oh, I'm dating somebody," we automatically assume that that is a dating relationship and that it's already an exclusive boyfriend girlfriend kind of thing. Um, but I mean, and then even like once if it does progress to that level, things change. People's feelings change. Some people change, and sometimes it's even though things are going well, it may come to pass that and maybe at some point during the relationship, you just don't think this is going to be um, something that you want to continue as a romantic relationship, and it should be perfectly fine at that point to say, hey, I like you, but this is going to work better as friends, or depending on what's going on, just hasta la vista. But I just think that it's like I said, you don't necessarily have to go to that next logical step just because it is the next logical step. I think if you have you develop feelings for somebody, then yeah, and those feelings are reciprocated. Game on like Donkey Kong, you know, and great, and it'll be great, hopefully. Um, but it's kind of one of those things that I just sort of see. I guess like kind of on a societal level, where it's like, our perception. You hear the word dating, and you just sort of automatically assume that it's some sort of a romantic, relationship, a romantic committed relationship, rather than just two people getting to know each other and trying to see if they do have any feelings and whether or not that is going to be a relationship, a romantic relationship that they would want to pursue. Um, but anyway, that was a thought I had. I wanted to just kind of expand. It was kind of something I didn't mention in the last video, and I kind of felt like it did justify its own video, um, just because it's it's branched off of it, but it's not necessarily the same thing. But it is one of those things societally, I think, that causes people to get into and stay in relationships far longer than they really should, just because of what those societal expectations are, and what we expect when we hear certain terms like that we equate dating with already being in that committed relationship. And um, yeah, that's not necessarily the case. So, on the reverse side of that, I often hear pretty much everybody agrees that the whole purpose of dating is to get to know somebody. So why wouldn't it be illogical to assume that just in the process of getting to know somebody, you may get to know them well enough to know that you may not want a romantic relationship. That it may not, there may not necessarily be anything wrong or anything that is, a red flag or anything like that, but it's just, either, there's a lack of mutual interest, or, maybe there's something that they believe that you don't believe, or that, you disagree with, or what have you, whatever it is. It just, it leaves the door open um, to essentially, exit out of the dating part of it without any sort of, um, I guess, well, without any sort of stigma or negative connotations to it. Um, I don't know. I just I feel like it's one of those things that maybe as a society we need to work on, because I like I said, I feel like a lot of times people get into relationships and stay into relationships because they've used the term dating, and now there's that expectation, and they feel compelled to put work into a relationship that maybe they're really not that invested in, or you know that maybe is not the best case scenario, or with somebody that you're not really feeling, developing those feelings for, you know um, but yeah, I think that's, we just need to change that expectation of dating as being already in that relationship. But anyway, those were just kind of some additional thoughts I had building off of my last video. Um, let me know what you think in the comments, and I will see you in the next one.